The year 2015 marked a turning point for Europe. It was a year that would challenge the continent's unity and test its resilience in ways not seen since the end of World War II. The European Union, a symbol of cooperation and shared values, found itself at a crossroads. The continent faced an unprecedented influx of migrants and refugees. Hundreds of thousands of people, driven by desperation and hope, made perilous journeys across land and sea to reach European shores. The sheer scale of this movement was staggering, and it quickly became one of the most pressing issues of our time. Many were fleeing war and poverty in the Middle East and Africa. Countries like Syria, Afghanistan, and Eritrea were ravaged by conflict, persecution, and economic hardship. For these individuals and families, Europe represented a beacon of safety and opportunity, a place where they could rebuild their lives and secure a future for their children. This crisis tested Europe's values and exposed deep divisions within its member states. The principles of solidarity and human rights, which are cornerstones of the European Union, were put to the test. Some countries struggled to cope with the sudden influx, while others debated the moral and practical implications of accepting so many newcomers. Some countries welcomed the newcomers with open arms. Germany, under the leadership of Chancellor Angela Merkel, famously declared, "We can do this," and opened its borders to hundreds of thousands of refugees. Volunteers and ordinary citizens across Europe mobilized to provide food, shelter, and support to those in need. Others, however, reacted with fear and suspicion. Concerns about security, cultural integration, and economic impact led to a backlash in several countries. Border controls were tightened, and anti-immigration rhetoric became more prominent in political discourse. This wave of migration fueled the rise of populist and nationalist movements across the continent. Leaders and parties that had previously been on the fringes of politics found new support by tapping into public anxieties and promising to take a hard line on immigration. These movements capitalized on anxieties about cultural change and economic insecurity. They argued that the influx of migrants threatened national identities and strained public services. Economic concerns, already heightened by the lingering effects of the global financial crisis, were exacerbated by fears of competition for jobs and resources. They promised to protect their citizens from the perceived threats of globalization and immigration. By advocating for stricter border controls and prioritizing national interests, these populist leaders gained significant traction and reshaped the political landscape in many European countries. One of the most vocal critics of mass migration was Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary. Orbán's government implemented stringent measures to prevent migrants from entering the country, including the construction of border fences and the introduction of harsh legal penalties for illegal entry. His stance resonated with many Hungarians and echoed across Europe, influencing the policies of other nations. Viktor Orbán's rise to prominence is a story of political cunning and ideological opportunism. A former student activist who participated in the protests against communist rule in Hungary, Orbán initially rose to prominence as a liberal reformer. However, he underwent a dramatic political transformation in the late 1990s. He embraced a more nationalist and populist rhetoric, sensing a shift in the public mood. Orbán's Fidesz party, once a champion of liberal democracy, adopted an increasingly illiberal agenda. In the midst of the 2015 migration crisis, Europe faced an unprecedented influx of refugees and migrants fleeing war, persecution, and poverty. Countries across the continent struggled to cope with the sheer number of people seeking asylum and a better life. Viktor Orbán, Hungary's prime minister, announced a controversial plan to build a fence along Hungary's southern border. This fence, stretching hundreds of kilometers, was intended to stem the flow of migrants entering the country. Orbán argued that the fence was necessary to protect Hungary from illegal immigration and potential terrorism. He emphasized that without such measures, Hungary's security and cultural identity were at risk. The government quickly mobilized resources to construct the barrier, deploying thousands of workers and security personnel. The move drew condemnation from many European leaders. Critics argued that Orbán's actions were inhumane and contrary to the principles of the European Union. They believed that building fences and walls was not the solution to the complex issue of migration. European officials accused Orbán of violating EU law and undermining European solidarity. They warned that such unilateral actions could lead to further divisions within the Union. Despite the backlash, Orbán remained undeterred, insisting that his primary responsibility was to protect Hungary. He argued that he was simply acting in Hungary's national interest. Orban's stance resonated with many Hungarians who felt that their country was being overwhelmed by the migrant crisis. His supporters rallied behind the fence as a symbol of national sovereignty and security. The fence became a potent symbol of Orban's Hungary First policy. It represented a broader shift towards nationalism and a rejection of the EU's approach to migration. As the fence stood tall along the border, it sparked debates about the future of Europe and the balance between national interests and collective responsibility. Across the Atlantic, a similarly unconventional figure was rising to power. Donald Trump, a real estate mogul with no prior experience in government, shocked the world by winning the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Trump campaigned on a populist platform that echoed many of Orban's themes. He promised to make America great again by cracking down on immigration, renegotiating trade deals, and putting America first. The ideological kinship between Trump and Orban extended beyond their shared rhetoric. Both leaders subscribed to a set of core beliefs that underpinned their political agendas. One such belief was a deep skepticism of immigration. Both men viewed mass migration as a threat to their country's national identities and security. They argued that it led to cultural clashes, economic instability, and increased crime. In a twist of fate, Hungary assumed the rotating presidency of the European Union in July 2017, just 6 months after Trump's inauguration. This put Orban in a unique position to act as a bridge between the United States and Europe at a time of heightened transatlantic tensions. Orban seized the opportunity to position Hungary as a key player on the world stage. The timing of Hungary's EU presidency and Trump's election victory was not lost on observers. Some saw it as a mere coincidence, while others viewed it as a sign of a shifting geopolitical landscape. The fact that 47 world leaders, a record number, visited Hungary during its presidency, only fueled speculation. The Budapest summit, held just days after Trump's inauguration, took on added significance. Behind the scenes, European diplomats and officials were engaged in a flurry of activity trying to decipher the Trump administration's foreign policy. Traditional diplomatic channels had been disrupted, and there was a sense that the old rules no longer applied. The Budapest summit highlighted the growing divisions within the European Union. On one side were those who believed that the EU needed to close ranks and present a united front against Trump's America. They argued that Trump's presidency posed an existential threat to the EU's values and interests, and that only by standing together could Europe hope to defend its way of life. Despite Orban's efforts to present himself as a bridge builder, the Budapest summit did little to dispel the sense of unease that had settled over Europe. Trump's unpredictable behavior and his disdain for multilateralism had left many European leaders deeply unsettled. They feared that the transatlantic relationship, the bedrock of European security and prosperity for decades, was unraveling before their eyes. The election of Donald Trump sent shockwaves across the Atlantic, and not just because of his unconventional style or his America First rhetoric. European leaders, accustomed to a predictable and generally supportive American presence on the world stage, found themselves grappling with a new reality. Trump's skepticism of NATO, his praise for authoritarian leaders, and his unpredictable foreign policy pronouncements created a sense of unease and uncertainty. The Trump presidency also exposed and exacerbated existing divisions within the European Union. The bloc, already grappling with the aftershocks of the Eurozone crisis and the ongoing challenge of migration, found itself increasingly polarized over how to respond to the new American administration. As the Trump administration settled into office, European leaders began to adapt to the new reality of transatlantic relations. Pragmatism, rather than principle, became the order of the day. The focus shifted from trying to change Trump's mind to trying to manage his behavior and to mitigate the potential damage to European interests. While the world watches the tragic events in Ukraine unfold, a key question lingers in the background. What happens if the war ends? The cessation of hostilities, while a welcome relief for humanity, would usher in a new set of geopolitical and economic complexities. Europe, already grappling with the immediate consequences of the war, would face the added challenge of navigating a post-war world order, one potentially reshaped by the conflict itself. One of the most significant economic repercussions that could emerge from a post-Ukraine war scenario is the potential reemergence of trade tensions between the United States and Europe. While the Biden administration has taken a more conciliatory approach to trade than its predecessor, the underlying economic concerns that fueled Trump's protectionist policies have not disappeared. In the heart of Europe, countries like Hungary and Poland, along with their neighbors in Central and Eastern Europe, find themselves at a significant geopolitical crossroads. In a post-Ukraine war world, these nations are navigating a complex landscape. The war has reshaped alliances and forced countries to reconsider their positions on the global stage. These countries, already walking a tightrope between their historical ties to Russia and their aspirations for closer integration with the West, face difficult choices as they navigate a new geopolitical reality. On the one hand, these countries share a deep-seated fear of Russian aggression, a fear that has only intensified in the wake of the Ukraine war. This fear is rooted in a long history of conflict and domination by larger powers, particularly Russia. The memories of Soviet control are still fresh in the minds of many, and the recent actions of Russia have only served to heighten these concerns. On the other hand, the desire for economic growth, political stability, and security drives these nations towards closer ties with Western Europe and NATO. The European Union offers economic opportunities and a framework for political cooperation that is very attractive to these countries. However, aligning too closely with the West can provoke Russia, leading to potential economic and military repercussions. This delicate balancing act requires careful diplomacy and strategic decision-making. As Central and Eastern Europe navigate this challenging landscape, their choices will have significant implications for the future of the region and the broader international community. As the dust settles on the tumultuous events of recent years, Hungary finds itself at a crossroads. Viktor Orbán's vision for his country, one rooted in national sovereignty, cultural homogeneity, and a rejection of liberal values, has put him at odds with much of the European mainstream. His embrace of Donald Trump, a figure who embodies many of the same populist and nationalist impulses, further isolated Hungary within the European Union. The war in Ukraine has only heightened the stakes for Hungary. The specter of a divided Europe, a continent once again split along ideological and geopolitical lines, looms large. The war in Ukraine has revived Cold War anxieties, with Russia casting itself as a bulwark against Western decadence, and the EU struggling to forge a coherent response to the Kremlin's aggression. Orbán's Hungary, with its close ties to Moscow and its skepticism of the EU, sits uncomfortably at the heart of this divide. The challenges facing Europe are immense. The war in Ukraine, the rise of populism, the threat of climate change, and the ongoing struggle to manage migration all test the bloc's unity, its resilience, and its commitment to the values upon which it was founded. Hungary, with its complex history, its strategic location, and its outspoken leader, will continue to play a pivotal role in shaping Europe's destiny.